Hi, God bless everybody. I'm excited to do this presentation for you all. I am not the most tech savvy person, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a shot and hope that it works. My selected missiologist is Jason Sexton, and I'll start with some basic biographical information about him. Jason Sexton received his PhD from the University of St. Andrews. He is trained as a systematic Trinitarian theologian, but his interests lie more at the intersection of social theory, theology, and cultural history. He's had most of his academic posts in California. As we'll see, he has something of an affinity for California. He is currently a lecturer at UCLA and also a visiting fellow in their Institute for the Environment and Sustainability. So again, kind of a wide range of interests that he shares. Relevant to my own research, Jason Sexton is a formerly incarcerated individual who has written significantly at the intersection of theology, prison ministry, and criminal justice. So I think maybe in our introductory post, I mentioned that my own interest is in criminal justice and thinking missiologically and from a Pentecostal perspective about criminal justice. And so he has been one of my dominant conversation partners in that space. What are his contributions vis-a-vis the developments in the field? It's kind of interesting when you look at it. Prison theology is not the most well-defined field. It is something that when you review the literature seems to be dominated by practitioners. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the books, you look at the articles, at least the academic ones, not the popular ones, they almost always tend to be written from the perspective of the minister, whether that's a prison chaplain, a professor who is directing a prison ministry program, maybe a volunteer who teaches in a bachelor's program for a prison. They're all written by practitioners. But Jason Sexton comes at it from the perspective of a systematic theologian. So that's already one distinguishing factor. But maybe more importantly, he comes at it also from the perspective of being forcibly incarcerated himself. So he speaks from the perspective of his own lived experiences, which is something that I was shocked to learn isn't very common in this academic space. The only other author that I've seen write anything in the realm of prison theology academically is Linda Lee Smith Barkman, but she hasn't really continued in the field. I think this was a publication that she generated through her own doctoral studies, and she's actually, I believe, a Fuller alum. Add to that the fact that there aren't that many evangelical voices talking about prison theology. Again, prison ministry and how to minister to people is different than prison theology and trying to conceptualize or provide a framework or a theory for how to understand criminal justice altogether. And if you just had to compare the evangelical side of things with the mainline side of things, just as a point of comparison, it's not even close. The mainline tradition has produced a lot of scholars that have spoken broadly about issues surrounding mass incarceration, criminal justice, and things of that nature. Probably one of the most well-known books is The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration, The New Jim Crow. The author of that book is actually, I don't know if she's still there, but she was a professor at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, which is, I would guess, non-denominational, but it has a heavy amount of students who come from a mainline perspective. So all these things help us understand kind of what the field looks like in terms of the contributors or the lack of contributors. And Jason Sexton provides elements that are lacking in all these different domains. He provides the more robust theological perspective. He provides the formerly incarcerated voice, and he provides an emerging evangelical voice as well. So I'll just walk very briefly through some of the major publications that Dr. Sexton has written. He starts theologizing about prison in 2015 with his journal article Toward a Prison Theology of California's Ecclesia Incarcerate. Here is the first place that I've seen where I believe Dr. Sexton introduces this term, ecclesia incarcerate. And his basic notion is that the traditional understanding of missions within prison really isn't true or accurate. The idea of some people on the outside going inside and to minister to people who are already there doesn't really account for the fact that the church is already in prison. There are churches in prison run by individuals in the prison institution. And so it's not so much what can the outsiders contribute to those on the inside, but maybe the question we should be asking is what is happening on the inside that can speak to the experiences outside, because the church is already present within the penal institution. He then shifts from that to a more ethnographic approach. He received some grant funding, I believe, to do an ethnographic study, which then becomes the product or produces or results in his 2018 article, Redeemed on the Inside, Radical Accounts of Ecclesia Incarcerate, where he tests his theory by interviewing something like 24, 25 individuals at a medium security institution, I believe, in California. And again, kind of trying to expand on this idea of what the prison church looks like from the inside perspective. He switches gears significantly once we get into, he provides some more practical resources, kind of in line with what we've seen in prison ministry, 10 tips to decarcerate your theology. But then he switches gears from 2022 to the present by approaching it more from a historical perspective and social theory perspective. He also becomes more explicitly evangelical, but not in the way that you would think. And in this article, these two articles that he's written, he talks about evangelical Christianity's contribution in a negative sense to mass incarceration as we see it today. So again, pushing the narrative away from what can evangelicals do to minister to prisoners to, no, wait, let's stop and wait and think for a second on how we've been complicit in this space. So that is one aspect of it. And he's continued to work in that space. He actually has a book that's forthcoming. So I should mention that he's also written more traditionally in missiology. He's edited and contributed to 2 works, The Church's Mission and The End of Theology, Shaping Theology for the Sake of Mission. I'll focus on the earlier work, if for no other reason that my mentor, Dr. Amos Young, provided a review where he says the end of theology not only overcomes the chasm between theology and mission, or missiology, but it also revitalizes the theological and dogmatic tradition from a missiological perspective. So again, speaking to this gap that Dr. Sexton is trying to fill between theology and mission. There are no systematic theologians talking about prison, criminal justice, prison ministry, prison theology, and so he's bridging that gap. And this is kind of another layer to that. He doesn't talk about criminal justice in this space, but he's speaking more generally, more conceptually about bridging that gap between theology and missiology. Again, he's written a bunch of other works more along the lines of Trinitarian theology, and he also has, like as I mentioned, the affinity for California. So he has a book called The Theology of California, which I have not read, but I imagine is interesting. Responses to Sexton's work, I might leave this more for my paper while I'll expand upon this in terms of discussion partners that he's had in this space, but I will just make a note that I've been fortunate enough to publish in this general area, and I was heavily influenced by some of Sexton's earlier articles. The idea of the ecclesia incarcerate really helped me kind of think through what a missiological perspective to carceral ministry might look like. He's also helped me amplify my perspective to be more holistic in nature. So not just thinking about the individual who's serving a sentence, but maybe the person who's at risk of serving a sentence before they get convicted. What about people who leave prison with no resources in place, post-conviction life? And things along those lines. So he's definitely shaped my perspective, and I expect him to continue to be a conversation partner as I continue my research. He has an anticipated book called The Prison Church, a theology of the ecclesia incarcerated, which is really him kind of bringing all these things together, starting from that article written in 2015. And one quote that I love that he kind of teases out, even though the book is not available yet, is if the modern prison is a failed Protestant social experiment, right? The evangelical contribution to mass incarceration failed. The prison system has not shown up to do what it intended to do in terms of rehabilitation and deterrence. If that has failed, what does it mean if there's a church on the inside, the ecclesia incarcerated? So I'm really excited to read that work as well. So his relevance to Christian mission can be summarized as follows. He provides a unique voice in the field as a systematic theologian, formerly incarcerated with an evangelical perspective. I mean, that's exactly what I'm looking for in my own research. He re-envisions criminal justice from theological and missiological perspectives, and he reassesses the role of Christianity in perpetuating injustice, criminal injustice, and the present mass incarceration situation. So he's pushing boundaries in good directions. Relevance for my own research, I've already alluded to it. I'll just put it more explicitly. So Dr. Sexton is an interesting conversation partner for me because he's formerly incarcerated. So he's speaking about prison theology as a formerly incarcerated individual. Well, in my case, I'm a former criminal prosecutor, and I'm also interested in this this space of prison theology. And so in my mind, I'm envisioning a dialogue between, on the one hand, a formerly incarcerated person, and on the other hand, a former prosecutor, and how we're both seeking from evangelical perspective to bridge the gap, from a missiological perspective to bridge the gap in understanding or conceptualizing what prison theology should look like and what it's all about. And so I mentioned that he'll be an ongoing discussion partner for me. And here are just some citations to the articles that I mentioned that relate more specifically to prison theology. I'll leave it there. I hope this has been an interesting, informative presentation, and I look forward to getting your feedback. Thank you.